So this is going to be clearly a presentation which is interfering with everybody's lunch tale rather than actually a audience session. So I'm going to just march on as if we had an orderly audience, which we don't. The session is as much about relative ethics and sustainability as it is about banking. The subject today, although the individuals presenting are touching on their own spheres of particular expertise, the overarching aspect of this is really to do with whether or not Islamic finance fits within a sustainable model in the United Kingdom, whether Islamic finance and banking can prosper sustainably in the UK or not. And our three eminent presenters are Dr. Arshadur Rahman, commonly known to all of us, I think, as Ash, and he is with the Bank of England, and he is really the Bank of England's #1 man on Islamic finance. That's what you really need to know about him, and he is responsible for many things, but his the most notable perhaps is piloting the liquidity management program for Islamic banks through the Bank of England, which was a much harder job than it sounds like it ought to be. Alongside Ash, we've got Dr. Usman Chaudry from Gatehouse Bank, my old shop, and his history in banking is as extensive and impressive as anybody else, I think, in the room. And then on a different perspective on the market, we have Areeb Siddiqui, who's the founder and CEO of Kestrl, which is essentially an Islamic digital bank, part of the the thriving fintech sector, and he's produced a successful model, which is not always the case, one which interacts efficiently with the conventional banking system. So between the three of them, they've got a uniquely interesting perspective on the development of Islamic banking going forward in the UK. So I'm not going to linger on this presentation. Hands up, everybody who's listening. That's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. We will occasionally come back with questions to the audience and ask for a similar exercise. So that's very encouraging. It's made me feel much better about this afternoon's session. So I'm going to call on Ash to talk to us first. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Right. So today I'm going to be taking a slightly different approach to those speakers that came before you. I will be laying out the regulatory approach within the UK, how we deal with Islamic finance, and how the journey has progressed over the past 10 to 20 years or so. So I'll skip over this actually because I think you've seen it. Okay. We face a number of questions often within the UK about how we actually deal with Islamic finance here. We field queries from academia, from the market, and also from fellow central banks from around the world. One of the biggest questions that we get is around how does a financial regulator or a regulatory body within the UK, within what is a secular regulatory and legal framework, how do we regulate Sharia? And the simple fact of the matter is we don't really regulate Sharia in and of itself. The UK regulatory bodies, as secular bodies, have no remit over Sharia compliance or lack thereof. And this is really important because even now we feel the same sorts of questions. What about the Sharia scholars? What about opinions on what is halal and haram? These sorts of things. The key things to bear in mind is that given that Sharia consists of high-level principles, it's often I feel mischaracterized as being Islamic law as a sort of fixed set of laws. The interpretation of these high-level principles can and does differ and can change over time as well. The UK applies a secular legal and regulatory framework based on secular common law, and that means that we can't actually opine on what is or what is not halal or haram. What we do, and this kind of relates back to the earlier discussions that Jonathan and others touched upon, is that we try to ensure as much as possible that the parties to a given contract are satisfied themselves as to the Sharia compliance or lack thereof. It's really up to the contracting parties. Now, the key thing there is to note that all material features of any given contract should be disclosed in a manner which is clear, fair, and not misleading, in keeping with the principles of treating customers fairly. So product disclosure is absolutely the most important element here. And for that, I would defer to my colleagues at the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, who are the conduct regulators within the UK for financial products and services. Another question that we often get is around the scholars themselves. How do we regulate the Sharia scholars, given the critical role that they perform within the Sharia governance processes for Islamic financial products and services? Now, within the UK, the regulatory approach that we've decided to take is to treat Sharia scholars within the Islamic finance market as being acting in primarily an advisorial capacity, similar to a firm's external legal counsel or their external financial auditors, for example. You know, they sign off with respect to Sharia compliance, but they're not members of the firm's executive management. Now, the caveat here is that where Sharia scholars actually act in an executive or customer-facing capacity, then they would need to be approved persons under the UK regulatory regime. And we do indeed have a few examples of this within the London market, where you have individuals who are both Sharia scholars, they have an ijaza from a reputable Islamic institution, but they're also conventionally trained, typically as lawyers in conventional financial markets as well. So it's on the basis of their conventional training that they are deemed to be approved persons. Now, I wanted to touch here upon the kind of macro level issue with regards to Islamic scholars, and I think this is something that's well known within the industry, in particular in IOFI and other key institutions, which is around the need for skills. And I think some earlier speakers talked about the need for ensuring that just generally within the Islamic finance sector, we have people with the right skill sets to actually be able to push the industry forward. For Sharia scholars, this is doubly important because they are pulled in two different directions here. In the first instance, not only do they need to be steeped in the Islamic sciences, they need to be experts in fiqh more generally, but they need to be expert in the subset of fiqh, al-fiqh al-mu'amalat, which relates to actual transactions, but then a subset of a subset, which is around Islamic finance. And this is something which isn't fully appreciated by people who sit outside the industry, how narrow or specialized this area is, and the skill sets required for this are non-trivial. Along with this, they need to also be conventionally trained as well in economics, finance law, regulation, these sorts of things, because Islamic finance does not exist in a vacuum. So rather than treating it as being a hermetically sealed set of products and services, it needs to be understood as part of a far richer and variegated ecosystem. So another question that we often get from a regulatory standpoint is, are Islamic finance firms inherently more risky by virtue of being Islamic finance firms relative to conventional firms? So is an Islamic bank, all things being equal, is it going to be more risky than a conventional bank? Our position on this is that these firms will not be intrinsically more or less risky just by virtue of being Islamic. Whether they are more or less risky will vary as a function of their business model, primarily, and how well they execute their strategies. There are certain risks that are often characteristic of Islamic banks, which are that, first of all, they will have an increased concentration risk in terms of their customer base or their assets, because they have to deal with a narrower set of assets, for example, because they can't engage in interest-bearing activity. They may have difficulties achieving economies of scale because they will typically start off as being quite a lot smaller, with smaller balance sheets. And they may have difficulty achieving that brand recognition that comes with more established institutions because they're newer. But it's really important to recognize that none of these risks are specific or unique to Islamic finance firms. Conventional firms which are smaller, which are niche, which operate according to a narrower mandate will also face similar sorts of risks. So what it boils down to really is devising a strategy and being able to execute it effectively. And just on this, strategy 101. With an institution deciding to follow a particular business model, strategy denotes trade-offs. So what they choose to actively not do is just as important as what they choose to do with their finite resources, time, and people. So from a regulatory standpoint, I think it's worth bearing in mind, and this is part of the training that I deliver internally to colleagues at the Bank of England, the FCA, and indeed certain government departments, which is not to be overwhelmed by jargon. If an industry is focusing so much on Arabic terms such as istisna, ijara, musharaka, etc., then there's a bit of a problem there because it's just labeling at the end of the day. What we need to do, and okay, I would say this, wouldn't I, because I'm from working at the central bank, is that you need to focus on the risk and economic profile of the underlying products and services. This is really, really important. Go beyond the label and look into the actual substance. What is it actually trying to do? And I think this actually touches quite relevantly to the points that Brother Mehmet was making earlier on around trying to get to the maqasid as well. What is it trying to achieve here? What is the genuine USP that we're trying to propagate here? Because if it's just down to labels, you're going to invite cynicism, not just within the Muslim community, but also more broadly as well. A couple of other things that's worth bearing in mind is that, while we tend to assume general equivalence between certain conventional products and Islamic finance products, they are not one and the same thing. So often we talk about sukuk as being Islamic bonds. Personally, I have a problem with the term bond. I don't think it's particularly accurate. Sukuk are more accurately defined as certificates which provide an economic or beneficial interest in some sort of underlying permissible Sharia-compliant activity or underlying asset. And what that means is that a headline label of sukuk might encompass a range of products across the spectrum, across the risk and reward profile. Some will be more like equity instruments, minus the voting rights, such as musharaka and mudaraba. The other end of the spectrum, you will have instruments like ijara, for example, which will be more akin to fixed income type instruments. And within UK law, they will be deemed as being alternative finance investment bonds under the 2009 Finance Act. The other point to bear in mind is that it's perfectly valid to question the business model. I think someone earlier on in the discussions mentioned the point about reviewing regulatory business plans. If a business plan is not viable, then that is a real problem. So we can't just say, yani, it's fi sabilillah, it's fine. No, we have to apply the same level of strategic thinking and also financial discipline when it comes to assessing the business plan of an Islamic finance institution. It's absolutely valid, and we shouldn't feel guilty about doing that. Ultimately, this is about business. This is business as opposed to charity. Okay, charity is something else. This is business, and it needs to be treated as such. And finally, within the UK, from a regulatory standpoint, we are secular regulators. We don't opine on Sharia, but we can be mindful of market opinion. And this is what we've tried to do, for example, with the work that we delivered on the alternative finance, alternative liquidity facility, the first non-interest-based central bank deposit facility offered by a Western central bank. So I will skip these in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ash. From the Bank of England's perspective, if you can, do you see the possibilities for further growth in Islamic finance in this industry in the UK? And do you have a perspective from the Bank of England on what Islamic finance looks like globally?
Okay, so that's a really broad question. Thank you, Richard. I don't think I can necessarily speak for the Bank of England because we don't have a formal position in terms of the future trajectory of the market. But speaking as an individual and someone who researches Islamic finance as part of my academic interest, I would say that there's certainly scope for growth. It really boils down to the path that people wish to take with this. So from a personal perspective, I would prefer to take a variegated approach. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, rather than putting all my money on one particular avenue to actually facilitate the growth. I'd say it's really quite important to actually explore multiple avenues simultaneously. What that means is that certain people will have a stronger affinity with certain ways of trying to develop Islamic finance. There'll be some, we've seen and we will see, I think, we've got examples here from the kind of traditional banking model and also the newer financial models which are being propagated at the moment in the UK. They all have a purpose, and some will fail, some will survive, and some will persist and grow. Demographically, I think there's an imperative. Anecdotally, I think there's a lot of latent demand. Someone earlier on in the discussions pointed to a supply constraint here because there aren't enough institutions offering a sufficient variety of products to actually meet the customer need. Technology and digitization, I think, is going to break down barriers to entry and also allow products which historically wouldn't have achieved the economies of scale to be able to do so going forward. So I would say in a nutshell, yes, I think there is potential.
And just very quickly, probably a 2-word answer or a 3-word answer. In terms of advancing the ethical and responsible sector specifically, Any comments about the success or otherwise of Islamic banks? Do they stand out as being champions of the good, or do they fall into the same category as the conventional sector?
I'm going to be very cautious here. I'd say the jury's still out. We have to bear in mind that the Islamic finance sector has developed in the UK, at least over the past couple of decades, whereas the conventional financial services sector has developed over centuries. So there's still plenty of time left. Very diplomatic, sorry. That's
a pointed question, because our next speaker is Dr. Usman Chaudry, who's Chief Risk Officer at Gatehouse Bank. And his topic really is very much advancing the ethical and sustainable model, and how Gatehouse has been managing that.
Thank you. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. In the interest of time, I'll try and keep this brief, but I'll actually touch on the last point that was just raised regarding whether Islamic finance can compete with the conventional banks around ethical and sustainable finance. The three key topics I'd like to just cover and hopefully keep you awake from your the graveyard shift, which is digesting the food and the large amounts of sugar that we've all consumed. So first and foremost, I just want to just go off script here and just cover off that point. I think certainly from a Gatehouse Bank perspective, if we look at some of the products that we've extended to align with whether it's the United Nations goals for development or responsible banking, and we heard earlier today regarding the Sharia finance screens and the ESG screens, the number of customers that we've originated, certainly on the savings side, for example, where we've extended green products, speaks for itself. Some 1 billion in savings over the past 6 years, 30,000 plus customers, and these are Sharia-compliant saving products. So slightly at odds to what I heard earlier today, which was there is no Sharia-compliant saving product in the UK. Our three scholars would say otherwise. And it's the same scholars that are providing guidance to 200 other institutions globally. On the financing side, then again, we have circa 1.5 billion in assets for real estate, housing and financing, which are also green products, and I'll expand on those in a few minutes, and circa 3,000 to 4,000 customers. And that's in the space of 6 years, 5 to 6 years, which speaks for itself. So I just want to just comment on that. I think we've got a long way to go, huge amount of potential, but I think we've done relatively well along with other Sharia-compliant banks, I'm sure. So I just want to touch on the first point here. So just kind of recapping and building on some of the themes that we heard earlier this morning regarding the alignment between Sharia finance and the whole ethical, ESG, whatever you want to call it, CSR frameworks. I just want to expand on that a little bit further. What does it mean to us, and how do we interpret that? Certainly at Gatehouse Bank and certainly some of our peer firms, it's certainly the fair treatment of customers through risk sharing, and that is supported by the Sharia-compliant instruments that we use, certainly for real estate financing in the UK. And I'll touch on that a little bit further regarding the recent regulation that the FCA has brought in regarding customer outcomes and ensuring good customer outcomes. So we were doing this from 2015, right? So when we started with the whole retail banking regime, we spoke to the FCA then. We didn't need regulation to tell us. We just looked at Sharia principles. We said this is the right thing to do. Fast forward 2023, and we have regulation coming in, forcing the banks to adopt certain practices that we had already adopted back then. The ethical and sustainable business practices also mean investing in certain industries that are not contributing to harm in our society. Financial literacy, which speaks for itself, certainly in terms of the younger generation, which we heard this morning, and protecting the climate. I'll just expand on that a little bit further. But these Sharia principles underpin everything that we do at Gatehouse Bank. And we don't just simply say, oh, because we're Sharia compliant, our job is done. We moved wholesale to move towards the United Nations principles for responsible banking, because we thought this was an additive value driver. So on top of the Sharia compliant piece, we added on the whole UN responsible banking principles. We strategically moved our entire business model to align with those principles. So this is an aggregate cumulative effect on top of the Sharia compliance principles that we apply. And so what does that mean? Well, it means we have a whole framework to work within, an additional framework. It's a complementary framework to the Sharia compliance obligations that we have. It means that we design our products, certainly in Gatehouse Bank's point of view. We design our real estate financing products from a I guess, a ESG perspective and a Sharia compliant perspective. So when we talk about real estate financing, we ensure that the financing goes to homes that are energy efficient. So really practical implications. I know we heard earlier today regarding some really complex, interesting tech stuff that's going on. This is about supporting people to buy their homes to support their families and their communities. So we seek to ensure that we finance homes that are energy efficient, and where they are not currently energy efficient, we certainly seek to support customers who want to achieve certain energy efficiency ratings, because it means that it's a lower cost of living to them over the longer term. On the financing side, we also expand further where we feel actually we can support customers who want to make certain home improvements on their home efficiencies and therefore lower their bills and, again, ongoing costs. On the savings side, we offset carbon emissions for many of our customers. As I said earlier, we have 30,000 plus savings customers, over $1 billion in savings on the retail side. We plant trees for our customers because we believe it's the right thing to do for our environment, for our communities and our climate. And so far to date, we have planted some 36,000 trees in very well-balanced, eco-friendly environments. And we work with the Carbon Trust. We don't just go out and start planting trees and say we've done this. We work with accredited industry bodies. So we have a Woodland Saver account. So again, if you look on the internet, you look for Sharia-compliant products. These are not only Sharia-compliant, these are ESG-compliant as well. And we report on this transparently through our annual reports, and we are also beholden to the United Nations Responsible Banking Principles. So we report to those against those principles every year, and we're held to a high level of standard in that regard. In terms of financial literacy, I mentioned earlier, we're trying to support the younger folk trying to save for the future. Financial inclusion, certainly for those that are 30 or younger, is so important nowadays. I know it's difficult with the cost of living crisis, and we absolutely understand that. But really, financial inclusion means long-term potential, I would say economic inclusion, economic certainty. Certainly when times are tough, like the economic outlook currently is challenging, you have a savings bed to kind of fall back on when times are tough. This is a positive thing. And we're trying to help break down some of the barriers for these customers to ensure that they are Sharia-compliant products, but also the barrier to entry is low. You can start off saving by just putting in £1. And then you're also having this ESG overlay, which is a fantastic positive thing for individuals to do, and certainly for the bank. Just touch on the second thing. I did talk about the United Nations Principles for Responsible Banking. We were the first Sharia-compliant bank to be a founding signatory of this. And bear in mind, we were relatively small at that stage. We're only $1.5 billion in assets at the moment. Okay, so when we look around some of our peers and we say they've been in this industry for quite some time, we thought this was the right thing to do. Went to the UN, went to sign up, set up our obligations, signed up to those, and we continue to report against those. So this underpins everything that we do in terms of transparency and design of products. I just want to expand a little bit more in terms of our obligations for the UN responsible banking. In terms of climate, I talked about financing energy-efficient homes. We have a commitment to net zero home finance targets by 2050, and we continue to push hard against those and try and accelerate where we possibly can. Financial inclusion, I touched on, and again, the UN holds us responsible for that to make sure that we follow up with our promises. And there are other further development goals that we have for our communities and sponsoring locally and nationally where possible. So far, so good. Good feedback, but there's more to do. We try to engage with as many communities as we can, but again, we're a small voice in a larger industry. It'd be good to hear in the Q&A session, what are others doing to kind of amplify the voice? We're trying to do our best. We've done a lot of surveys. Dr. Bashar earlier today referenced the Gatehouse survey from 2019 regarding raising awareness in Islamic finance in the UK. I think there's more all of us can do in that regard. And I'm trying to move forward here. Let's see if that works. Okay, I just want to wrap up on this piece here. So what is that we can do in terms of amplifying Islamic finance in the UK? I think the question was asked, is there an opportunity? Is there an opportunity for other peer firms to go out there and grow further? Absolutely, there's a huge amount of demand. We heard earlier on demand and supply. The drivers are there. There is a challenge, but I will come on to that. But the demand is absolutely there. How do we grow from 0 to $1.5 billion in assets to 5,000 customers on the financing side in 5 years, 30,000 plus customers on the savings side? This doesn't happen out of nowhere. But firstly, these products are calibrated for the customer, Sharia compliant, ESG compliant, and a good number of our customers are not seeking Sharia compliant products, which is great for inclusivity. That's so important because we need to ensure that it's not just the target market, it's the broader addressable market that we're here for, our broader communities. I also want to say that there's certainly stuff that we can do regarding regulation, legislation, and Ash talked about the alternative liquidity facility. He's doing a great job at the Bank of England. I think the Bank of England has done a sterling job compared to some of our central bank peers in the rest of Europe, supporting our liquidity needs, which is supporting our regulatory needs. There's more to do, but I think we've made good progress to date. And lastly, in terms of raising awareness, this is crucial. We continue to invest to raise awareness across the UK of Islamic finance. I hear individuals coming up to me saying, what products does Gatehouse Bank provide? So it clearly shows that there's more work for us to do across the industry, but we are just but one voice. We need to amplify this voice by trying to come together in a very coherent way, and therefore try and reach out into the broader masses and tap into the potential that is very clearly there. Okay, I'll wrap it up there. My time's flashing, but happy to answer any Q&As. Okay, thank you.
So, Dr. Usman, I'm just going to ask you, what percentage of your client base is non-Muslim, do you think?
So I've got to be careful here. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. It's very difficult because we don't ask our customers particularly their religious orientation.
Perhaps I could ask the question differently.
Anecdotally, I can answer that. We would say 3/4 are Sharia-seeking customers on the financing side. Yeah. There's a quarter, roughly, that are, we believe, not Sharia-compliant seeking customers, i.e. likely not Muslims. We have a really good, diverse set of customers, internationally and UK.
And do those non-Muslim, or potentially, anecdotally, non-Sharia compliant seeking customers, ask about the aspects of Sharia compliance at all? Do they show an interest in it, or?
See, this is interesting because the point was made earlier today regarding the 3 categories of customers. I think there are just 2. You either want Sharia or you don't. And typically, if you want Sharia, folks, as we see it, there's a customer feedback we get, not academic, abstract views, but this is grounded in empirical data that we get from our customers. They will pay whatever it takes to become Sharia-compliant products. For the non-Sharia-seeking customers, they don't mind. It's, as far as they see, they're trying to finance a home for their families. The lawyers will deal with what's needed for the underlying instrument. The bank is very clear in terms of its comms. There's a Q&A. You can call in and speak to some of our colleagues to understand a little bit more about the Sharia compliance, its certification. But generally, the non-Sharia compliant customers like it because it's a product we can execute well, and it meets their needs.
Okay. Well, Gatehouse is very much an incumbent in the market, a bank who's already established and successful in its space. And our next speaker is very much not an incumbent, he's a challenger. And it'll be very interesting to listen to Areeb and his perspective on how that challenge is going to help develop the sector.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Areeb Siddiqui. I'm the founder and the CEO of Kestrl, Muslim Money App. We're an Islamic fintech that started 3 years ago right here in the UK. And I'm going to be talking to you about the rise of Islamic fintechs here in the UK and whether or not they may be the final frontier of Islamic finance, which is a bit of a clickbaity title, but bear with me. So we spent a lot of time talking about fintech, but how many times do we actually end up defining it? What actually is a fintech? Well, technically, nothing should actually be defined as a fintech unless it is a piece of technology that fundamentally transforms the business model of a financial services industry. Prime examples of this in the past have included the first ATM machine to be opened right here by Barclays in 1967, the first chip and pin debit card, which was in the 80s in Canada, I think, PayPal, the very young Elon Musk and Peter Thiel there back in 1999, who came up with the simple idea that sending money around the world should be as easy as sending an email. And most recently, Apple Pay and Google Pay, where every single person's smartphone here has been turned into a direct line of communication with your bank. So all of these were clearly game-changing solutions. So if these are all examples of fintechs, what then is an Islamic fintech? That's exactly the question we're going to be exploring here today. And I would love to do that using the case study, which is my own firm, Kestrl. Now, Kestrl started 3 years ago, and it was born out of a very personal frustration. I was fed up of feeling like I was doing something wrong every time I had to use one of these. Every time I use a typical debit card, and it's a problem that many other Muslims faced in the UK and in the Western world. Of course, for us, interest is forbidden. And Muslims, for the most part, know that. They know that very well in the UK, and they care about it. But there's very little they can actually do about it. It's a problem that's shared by between 4 to 5 million Muslims here in the UK. Unofficially, maybe it's a bit higher, and around 25 million Muslims in total in the Western world as a whole, who have a strong desire for this kind of solution, but very few actual solutions do exist. Now, it was a particularly bitter pill for me to try and swallow because I was working in and around financial services. I was a management consultant at Deloitte and PwC, helping big banks and wealth managers to digitally transform and develop their own fintech strategies. We saw the rise of Monzo and Starling, some of the foremost digital banks here in the UK, as well as wealth techs like Nutmeg coming about. All things that I couldn't use, and my family couldn't use, and people like me couldn't use. So I took a year out, and I went to University of Cambridge to do an MBA. And that's where I met my co-founder, Daeng Tirmizi. Daeng's from Malaysia, where Islamic banking is pretty much the norm. And he saw me one day paying for lunch with a non-Islamic banking card. And he asked me up front, why don't I use an Islamic bank? And I kind of ummed and ahed, and I had to explain that they do exist in the UK, but I kind of had an apprehension about using it. I hadn't heard great things. So that's where the idea came from. We then did a nationwide survey as part of our final semester there. We interviewed 1,500 Muslims all over the UK, from Cambridge all the way up to Scotland, to understand, do they care about this? And if they do care about Islamic finance, were they using any solutions themselves? Interestingly, 95% of people we surveyed said they strongly did desire an Islamic finance alternative to their existing services. But when asked how many were using them, whether it was an Islamic bank or a wealth manager, fewer than 3% were doing that. And the top reasons for that, time and time again, were coming up as poor customer service, terrible user experiences, and much higher fees. All these three things came together to create a perfect storm of mistrust within the sector. In terms of the top problems people kept on talking about, it was, time and time again, home financing, surprise, surprise, student loans, and also financial literacy. And by that, we're talking about means of actually growing your wealth in a Sharia-compliant way, whether through savings accounts or investment accounts. Many people had no idea where to start. And it was that final point that we chose to tackle with Kestrl. Kestrl is an app that helps Muslims who'd like to grow their wealth without having to compromise, whether it's on their beliefs, on user experience, or on price. Now, we do that right here in the UK, and that is a complete testament to how amazing our regulator is here, the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority. Using the FCA's very forward-thinking belief in helping fintechs to come up, we leverage something called open banking here in the UK. What that means is that every single bank in the UK has to make customer data openly available to anyone who would like to share it through open APIs. So whatever bank you're using, Barclays, HSBC, Monzo, Starling, all of that data can be plugged directly into Kestrl. So we can see transactions, we can see income. That is then processed by Kestrl's proprietary artificial intelligence and used to come up with a financial plan for Muslims. We start off with budgeting and debt repayment, spending insights. We move on to auto-saving to help people save towards their goals in a timely fashion. We then help them and suggest halal savings and investment options for them to use. We can also do Sharia auto zakat calculation, as well as Sharia stock screening and the like. So this was our consumer app. And it was going well, and it was taking advantage of the great regulations we have here in the UK. But then something really interesting happened. An Islamic bank, the biggest Islamic bank in Malaysia, Bank Islam, reached out to us and said that they liked what we were doing. Could we help them to digitize and launch their own digital bank? So that's exactly what we did a year ago. And we helped them to go live with their new digital bank, BU. We're now doing this in other markets, and we're getting a lot of interest from other banks in Malaysia, the UAE, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, and beyond. So this brings me back to my original question. I'll just skip through this. What is an Islamic fintech? So in order to break this down, I'd like to see it as three phases. Islamic Finance 1.0, which are really the original Islamic banks here in the UK. And we're different from most of the other countries in the West in that we do have an Islamic banking ecosystem. You have the likes of Al Rayyan, formerly Islamic Bank of Britain, of course Gatehouse, Habib Bank AG Zurich, BLME. But interestingly, we had HSBC Amana. We also had Lloyds Bank, which had their own Sharia-compliant accounts. Now, those, unfortunately, HSBC and Lloyds closed theirs down. But all of these banks had one thing in common. They did appeal to the Muslim market, but to a subset of it, through our research anyway. We call these guys the diehards. These are people who, whatever it takes, they're going to put their money into something that is stated to be Sharia compliant. And that is regardless of the user experience, the customer service, the price, they're going to move towards it. And we think that makes up a relatively small part of the total Muslim market. Then came wave 2, Islamic Finance 2.0, where we have the likes of digital banks that began to spring up, wealth tax, home financing solutions, as well as crowdfunding solutions. All of them with their own merits, some of them with their weaknesses in their business strategies as well. The digital banks, it's worth noting that of those which are still up there, only one of them still exists today, which is interesting, and we can get into that in the Q&A. And that's Gatehouse, which is AlBaraka's own digital bank based in Germany. Now, these appeal to a different subset, much more than the diehards, but I still call them the early adopters, around 5 to 10%. These are people who would love to have a better user experience and customer service, all of these things which these fintechs offer. However, to appeal to the mass market, they're still waiting for something new, something bigger, and some legitimacy, which, as fintechs, it's hard for us to garner on our own. So that's the next wave, and Islamic Finance 3.0, as some of the speakers have talked about already. I think that's what's coming. And that's the use of new technologies like generative AI, Web3 like Facet, Takadao, and of course, Marhaba, which is talked about earlier. We're also seeing a lot of new venture capital firms spring up, helping to finance a lot of these fintech solutions, like Curate Capital by Islamic finance gurus, Wahid X, which is Wahid Invest's own VC arm, and Innate Capital Partners over in the US. And the final thing are new banks. I think we're going to see a big change here in the UK in the coming years. A lot of banks, both abroad as well as here in the UK, are seeing an opportunity, that there is a clear demand and a lack of supply in the Islamic finance space. We're already hearing about banks from Malaysia, Saudi, the UAE, which are looking to take up banking licenses and come here to try and take advantage of this, as well as complete new outfits just getting their own banking licenses here in the UK. But what I would love to do is to try and encourage, go back to where we were with HSBC and Lloyds. If a high street bank were to open up their own Islamic window, I think that would be a game changer, where you could take the legitimacy of a bank with hundreds of years of influence and power and ultimately branding, combine it with the forward-thinkingness of Islamic Finance 3.0, and I think that is how you capture the rest. That's it. Thank you very much.
So, Areeb, what you're saying is take on the incumbents by partnering up with a conventional.
I think it's the only way.
Yeah. So that must be in your pipeline, is it?
Ideally, yeah.
Very good. Well, there we are. You heard it here first. Scary?
Not at all, no. Welcome it. As I said, we need to increase our volume and voice, right? So I think we can certainly amplify it by the more players we have in this market and this.
And to be clear, we could be partners.
Very good.
We're all friends here.
So, first question from the floor over there. Second one will be here. I don't know whether we've got... if you could just tell us who you are and if it's relevant, where you're from.
My respected elders, my learned scholars, my beautiful brothers and sisters in Islam, I welcome you all with the wonderful salutation, Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Asif Malik. I'm head of fundraising and community engagement for National Zakat Foundation. I've just got one simple question, and this is for Brother Areeb. Can you guarantee a 6% rental return on anyone who saves £1,000 and above
An Islamic bank can. Someone with a banking license and FSCS protection, for sure, that can be done.
But can Kestrel?
We don't have a banking license ourselves, but through a third-party partner, we can do that.
Guaranteed 6%.
If that's what the market is saying at the moment, then yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to comment on that?
No.
Okay. Wahid is next, and then Jonathan.
Thank you for your excellent presentations. Areeb, let me share my experience with you being part of the Islamic window, which was basically the first Islamic window anyway in the world of a British bank, and which I worked together in that. So our experience is where you attach the Islamic banking to a conventional bank as a division of a conventional bank. It is very difficult to gain confidence and trust among the consumer customers. However, it's different when you deal with the SMEs and the corporate entities. Because the corporate entities, they look for rating, which obviously conventional banks would have, but Islamic banking, most of the banks as of today, they will not have the rating. And therefore, from the risk perspective, they will not be dealing with that. So I think here my question is, for example, I rewrote the strategy paper when I was heading private banking for UBS, and that was the no-riba bank set up in Bahrain. Now, they totally detached themselves from that. They did not call it as their Islamic window, and therefore it was able to capture some market share. Eventually, for whatever reason, they decided not to go ahead with it, just like the HSBC, Amana, and Lloyds did. So my question here is, obviously you have done a lot of research all across UK, so maybe you have an insight that you could kindly share with us, that what has changed that the consumers would still come and bank with an Islamic window where they do not have their own separate balance sheet. That's quite important. Thank you.
I think that's always going to be a factor for some people. In the early adopters market, it's one of the most common things. Is it interest by another name, which we're just relabeling as profit? What's the actual difference there? However, from what I'm seeing in the mass market, the kind of 80 to 90%, the majority of them just want someone to tell them it's Islamic. Whether that's right or wrong is a different question altogether, a completely different conversation. But I think it's a starting point. We're talking about one of the most financially illiterate populations in the UK, indeed anywhere in the world, right? These are people who are putting their money in current accounts in perpetuity. If they are generating any interest, they're giving away immediately. Some of them don't even know that Gatehouse savings accounts are there, or indeed our Rayyan's or anyone else's, right? And they'll happily go to them if they did, but there's a big marketing issue there, marketing and financial literacy issue. I think the starting point would be an Islamic window. Because if HSBC said that they were launching their Islamic window again, Muslims would flock to it. There would always be the naysayers, but for the most part, from our research anyway, it indicates that people would go for it. The next step then is how you get the others.
Okay. I think Jonathan's going to be our last question, is that right? Do we have time for more? Jonathan, to give us in.
Jonathan Erkenbrock, SOAS. Thank you for your presentations. Very enlightening. I'm interested in how you're attracting non-Muslim customers. And I wonder, is this an aspect of your marketing? What do you see as being the reasons for attracting those customers? And is that a core part of your business strategy? And I'm also interested in how the role of technology affects going after that larger market segment. If my hypothesis is even partially correct, the success of Islamic finance on a global level depends to some extent on going after that non-Muslim clientele. It's a huge untapped market, and I just wonder what you're doing in that relation.
I think that's...
Is that to me?
For Usman, yeah, probably best.
Well, both of you, really.
Okay, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So with us, when we started Kestrl, Kestrl is the name of a bird. It has no Muslim connotations to it at all. It was a funny story. It's because Kestrels are a little falcon, and they eat, amongst other things, starlings. And it was a little joke that we were going to take on Starling Bank. But the idea originally was also that we were going to be mass market, ethical, as opposed to just Islamic. Something interesting happened when we started marketing ourselves that way. Muslims were coming to the website and not seeing enough targeted marketing to them. So they weren't really signing up, thinking, oh, it's just another ethical solution. You have Triodos, you have even Monzo, a bunch of others who were saying that they were ethical. And non-Muslims were coming to the site and seeing a little hint of halal. So like we have a Sharia advisor and other things, and they were getting turned away. So we were trying to be everything to everyone and ended up being nothing to nobody. So we decided to really focus, double down, and say that we are the Muslim money app built by Muslims for Muslims on the basis of Sharia to try and capture that beachhead market. I do agree with you, though. I think for the longevity of this space, as one of the speakers said before, Islamic finance is for all people. It's not just for Muslims, it's for the good of humanity as a whole. And I think that's what we need to be driving towards. And I think partnering with the likes of one of the big conventional banks or a bank like Gatehouse, for example, I think that is the only way to get there.
As you can tell, we're being gently encouraged.
I just want to share some reflections. I've been on both sides of the fence, conventional banking, traditional banking, Islamic banking, and helping set up fintech, i.e. Tandem Bank, right? So it was the cohort with Starling and Monzo. I think the premise of your point, it is absolutely a misnomer to create a product just for Muslims and expect it to be viable. It does not work and will not work. There's an insufficient level of momentum and customers to generate the money that's needed on investment to create the tech in the UK, right? And I say this with some case studies in mind. I don't necessarily want to share names, but there are firms that are spending millions building tech, and they cannot just simply target Muslims. So what is it that you do? And certainly from a Gatehouse perspective, we are Sharia compliant. Our target market certainly is the Sharia compliant space, but we have to go to the broader addressable market. So you have the Sharia compliant product, you overlay that, wrap it with an ESG product, so you're making sure that it's actually broadly addressable to a range of potential customers, and that is how we grow customers. There is no magical formula. It's very simple, and I think we overcomplicate things and probably do ourselves down. It's quite simple. We have to operate in a fairly complex economic environment where there are traditional entrenched banks, there are new banks like Monzo. But the recipe is fairly simple. Create a product that appeals to a broader mass market. It's Sharia compliant, but always will be Sharia compliant. If it's applicable to other customers, fine. Is it a product that is priced well? Is it executed well? The economics work, and you get the profitability that allows you to invest in other products. That is it. If you start to head down this journey like some of the startups do, invest in great, sexy, fancy tech, oh, and then who do I sell this to? Well, it's probably 5% of the population, which of that is probably 3% bankable. Of that, probably 2% need another account. Well, the economies of scale just do not work. So I take your point, and I support the point that we have to target a broader addressable market. There are multiple ways of doing that. I'm not saying Gatehouse is the only way, but I think you have to go beyond this core, which is the Sharia compliance seeking market.
And the last comment goes to the Bank of England.
Sorry.
As always, last word comes from the Bank of England.
You're very kind, Richard. I was going to say that a lot of this resonates. Back in 2007, we actually wrote a regulatory paper called Islamic Finance in the UK, Regulations and Challenges. And we said that the ability for Islamic finance to sustain itself over the longer term would basically depend on its ability to cross over to the mainstream and no longer be seen as a niche product. That was 16 years ago. I think the principle still holds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.